Governor Cuomo, though, of course, has been talking up this idea of a middle-class tax cut in New York, and to pay for that, he is going to hike taxes on the rich, a so-called millionaire's tax that actually would kick in at $500,000. Remember the last time they tried this in New York? It was supposed to be very short-lived and last about a year or two. I believe that was cooked up during the Dinkins administration. And, of course, it still persists in varying degrees today. So the thing about tax increases, whether they're on one set of the population or not, is they have a way of sticking around, and doesn't Trump economic advisor Steve Moore know it? Steve, good to have you. What did you make about this tit-for-tat back and forth with Donald Trump, a big New York City liberal, the governor of New York, who so far has ruled out a 2020 run, but is sounding like he might be laying the groundwork for one, that the rich don't need a tax cut. If anything, they need a tax hike.
First of all, I don't believe for a minute that he's not looking at a 2020 race. I don't believe that for 1 minute. I thought it was so interesting how he really focused on what's good for New York and tried to pull back Trump, obviously a New Yorker himself, from some of his policy proposals. And I got to tell you this, Neil, because as you know, I've done a lot of work looking at the growth rates of various states. And there's no state over the last decade that has done worse than New York State. Maybe a few, my home state of Illinois. But these blue states like New York have lost, I'll give you one statistic that's amazing. New York has lost 1 million net citizens to other states over the last decade. People are leaving New York, and the reason they're leaving, in part, is because what you just talked about, Neil, these high taxes. Now, why is that relevant to this discussion? Because I believe if you put in place many of the policies that Donald Trump is talking about, rollback of Obamacare, the federal tax cuts on businesses, the deregulation, I think you actually bring economic development back to those places in upstate New York that haven't seen any kind of economic development for a long time. So I think New York is going to be a big benefit if that Trump economic program goes through.
You know, let me ask you about the plan that the president-elect is cooking up and where it might stand. I know you're inside on this, and I know you're a big believer in big tax cuts, but I'm getting an increasing sense when I talk to, I don't know, for lack of a better term, Steve, establishment Republicans, former Treasury Secretary John Snow yesterday on this very show, that we're not going to see big tax cuts, particularly for the wealthy. I'm leaving out the corporate one, if you don't mind, for the purpose of this argument. Sure. Where do things stand?
Well, a couple things. I think the primary focus of Donald Trump, and I've been telling his economic team this, they really have to focus on that business tax cut because, Neil, that's where the economic bang for the buck is. If we can get that corporate tax rate down from 35%, the highest in the world, down to somewhere between 15 and 20%, the Trump plan is at 15, the Paul Ryan's plan is at 20. Let's say it's at 20%. That is a magnet for new capital coming into the United States, especially when you add into account that that repatriation tax of 10% that's going to bring a lot of money back as well. So I think the business tax cut is essential. I think they need to get that done quickly. Now, on the individual income tax rate cuts, that's a lot harder to do because you're talking about taking away deductions, which is really difficult because you got an army of special interests that are opposed to that. And also, Democrats in Washington don't want to cut the highest tax rate. Neil, they want to raise the highest tax rate on rich people. So you're going to get a big battle on that.
This thing, the tax cut thing, its aggressiveness is falling apart.
I think it may be, you heard it first here on Fox Business News, I think you may see two bills. I think you may see a business tax cut where you could actually get, I believe, a lot of Democrats, especially if you link that with infrastructure spending. Then you might leave the second part, which is the broad-based tax reform, for another day. Now, one other quick point, if I may. It was interesting how the governor in that press conference said you can't get rid of the deductibility of state and local taxes because he said that's going to be a big tax increase on New York. And he's right about that. I mean, can you imagine raising the tax rates in New York State? Already they're at 13.5% in many parts of the state. If they raise it another point or two, you're at 15.5%. You can move to Texas and pay zero, for goodness sakes. And the only reason New York is even able to get away with it right now is because the federal government allows you to deduct a third of that. If you get rid of that deductibility, you know, it makes it impossible for people like Cuomo to raise those high tax rates. The same problem in California, New Jersey, Connecticut, Illinois. Those blue states really get hurt by that.
All right. Steve, thank you again. We appreciate it. Steve Moore,
thank you, Neil.
economic swingale to the incoming administration.